Since we're talking about science, did you hear that one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron, and the second atom said, are you sure? And the first atom said, I'm positive. That's my science joke. All righty. All right, let's continue. We'll just dive right on into the teleological argument, which again means the argument from design. And there are two ways in which we can see design out there in nature. We can see design in the universe itself and also life itself. So let's take a look at each of these. We're going to start with the universe because we just got done talking about that the universe exploded into being out of nothing. Turns out that the universe exploded into being out of nothing with extreme precision. This is called now the fine-tuning of the universe. This is a relatively new discovery in science. When I say new, maybe 50, 60 years. That scientists have learned that there are aspects about our universe and about the laws of nature, about the constants in the universe, about certain ratios between the elementary particles, things like this, that are just so precisely tweaked. They're so precisely set where they are that if you were to alter any of them, just a hair's breadth, there would be no universe and there would be no life. It's as if there's a control room somewhere that controls the universe, and there's all these dials set exactly to the right value, and if you were to change any one of these dials slightly, there would be no universe, there would be no life. For example, one of the dials that's set extremely precisely is the expansion rate of the universe from the very beginning. Stephen Hawking, again, the atheist, put it this way. If the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. In other words, if you were to change the expansion rate of the universe, that infinitesimal amount, we wouldn't be here. Now, that's a very precise expansion rate. Now, what does this say about Darwinism? Nothing. But I always hear atheists, or often hear atheists say this, well, if macroevolution is true, you don't need God. That's nonsense. Even if macroevolution were true, which it's not, but even if it were true, you need a creator and a designer right at the very beginning of the universe. These are the initial conditions of the universe. Long before you get to life, long before you get to biology, you need a creator and a designer, it appears. Because the expansion rate itself, first of all, the creation event, and then the expansion rate is precisely tweaked. Somebody put that value right in at the beginning. In fact, there's only 3 possible explanations for that value being right where it is. Physical necessity. It had to be that value. No, it didn't have to be that value. Chance. It just so happened to fall right where it is. I don't have enough faith to believe that. In fact, chance. What is chance? When scientists use the word chance, what do they really mean? Is there a force out there known as chance that causes things? Who caused this? Chance! He was just here! No. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance is not a cause. So when scientists use the word chance, what they really mean is, we don't know. The third possibility after physical necessity and chance is design. Somebody designed that value to be right where it is. That seems to be the best explanation. The same being that created the universe, a millisecond later is the same being that's designing the expansion rate of the universe. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40? That's 1 in 10 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity is not measured in inches. This is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. 1 inch over a scale as wide as the entire known universe. Again, only 3 possibilities: physical necessity, chance, or design. Seems like somebody designed that value to be right where it is. In fact, you can even make a case that our solar system is designed with us in mind. Where are we in the solar system? Right there, third rock from the sun. Who said you don't learn from sitcoms? Right there. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we wouldn't be here. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is the axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Oxygen in this room right now is 21%. If it were 15%, we'd all suffocate. If it were 25%, spontaneous fires would break out. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we wouldn't be here. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Yes, Jupiter's gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these purple marks are right here? Those purple marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. In fact, I was on the Drudge Report a couple of years ago, and whenever I want to be convinced that the universe is going to end this week, I go to the Drudge Report. So I read, what is this crazy? What's going on out there? Anyway, this headline on the Drudge Report said this: astronomers believe major meteor to hit Earth in 2040. I am rooting for Jupiter. Jupiter can save us. In fact, you want to see the size of Jupiter? Check this out. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. Do you know Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet? I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. It's another star in our galaxy. It's not outside our galaxy, that's inside our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Here's Jupiter's 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto? Forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus. You got Arcturus right here? Where's Arcturus? Now. Right there, left of the white star, Regal. That's Antares, another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. This is just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. These stars are in our galaxy. In fact, the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. All that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles. How far is 30 trillion miles? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. That is, if the gas pedal doesn't stick. Stephanie and I were out in the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona a number of years ago. We took our kids out there when they were small, and her parents used to live out there. And if you go to Tucson, this Desert Museum, it's a little ways outside the city. And if you go out there at night, since it's pretty far outside the city, there's not a lot of city lights, and if it's a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So they'll take you out and look at the stars, and we had a guide with us that day, and he goes, well, it's so clear tonight, if we look up at 9:03, we're going to see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking across the sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up, the sun was still reflecting off of it. And when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. It goes around the Earth once every hour and 15 minutes. 18,000 miles an hour is 5 miles per second. Got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be there, here to DC in 4 seconds. Now, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles at 5 miles a second? How long would it take us? What do you think? Long time? It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star, an average distance away in our galaxy, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. Who'd like to go to the next nearest star? We'll go. Get in, kids! Are we almost there yet, Dad? Another 200,000 years. Play some more Xbox. No, we're not going anywhere in space. You know how long it took us to get to Pluto? 9 years. To Pluto. There's no way we're getting anywhere out there in space. It's just too far and it's too dangerous. But imagine one day we do figure out space travel. We can go at the speed of light. By the way, it's the speed of light. The next nearest star is about 4 years away. 4 years at 186,000 miles per second. Forget about it. But let's imagine we do get there. In fact, what I'm about to show you is a little bit disturbing, but I want to show it to you anyway. Let's suppose we get to another planet somewhere outside of our solar system. We get there, we plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I showed that video Stephanie once when I first saw it. To show you how analytical she is, I showed it to her, and she smiled a little bit, and she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." I just love that guy who's bouncing. You want to see that again? Watch the guy who's trying to get away. He's cursing gravity the whole time. Watch this. There we go. This guy. He just can't get away. All right, how many stars are out there? A lot. Another good answer. You guys are very precise in this audience today. It's far, Frank. A lot. Good. The number of stars out there are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. You see this here on the left. This is from the ground. You see that square right there? That's this square from the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are stars, heavenly bodies. February 1st, 2003, President Bush goes into the East Room in the White House. They turn the TV camera on. Every major network carries his address. It's Saturday afternoon. Why on Saturday afternoon would he be doing a nationwide address? The president looks in the camera and said, "My fellow Americans, this morning our country experienced a great tragedy. Upon re-entry into the atmosphere, the space shuttle Columbia burned up in the skies over Texas. There are no survivors. The Columbia is lost." The president then went on to quote from Isaiah chapter 40. Why Isaiah chapter 40? Because in Isaiah chapter 40, God is speaking. And what does God say? Beginning in verse 25. "To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One." In other words, you want a comparison? You want to know what I'm like? Here's what God says. "Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and named them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." The president looked back in the camera and said, the same God that created and named all those stars is the same God that created and knows the names of the 7 astronauts who perished today. While they did not return safely home to us, we can all now pray they've all returned safely home. You want to know what God is like? Most Christians have the wrong idea of who God is like. We think God is a big angel. No, God is not a big angel. You want to know what God is like? Meditate on the attributes of God. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, just, loving, a creator who sustains all things and whose every attribute is infinite. Meditate on those attributes, then remove all limits from your mind. That's God. Why is there a second commandment? Thou shalt make no graven image. Because any image you make of an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. You can't draw a picture of infinity or an infinite being. Oh, you can draw a picture of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus had 2 natures. He had a divine nature and a human nature. You can draw the human nature. You can't draw the divine nature. So every attempt we have to draw an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. Psalm 103, verse 11 says, "God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth." How high are the heavens above the earth? Stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. From our perspective, infinite. That's the point. Even though the heavens themselves are finite. And as the universe is expanding, it's expanding into nothing. It's not expanding into empty space. Space is being created as it expands. And despite the vastness of the universe, it's still finite. But from our perspective, it appears infinite, which is why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. Why God says, you want to know what I'm like? Look to the heavens. The closest thing in our experience to the heavens or to God are the heavens. Now, you can look through a telescope and get that sense of awe, but you can also look into a microscope and get that same sense, and that's what we're going to do now, and look at life. Do you see this? This is a one-celled amoeba. This is something the Darwinists say we all evolved from. You heard of the theory of macroevolution, from the goo to you via the zoo? This is the goo. or from the infantile to the reptile to the crocodile to the gentile. Okay, this is the infantile. Now, take a look at this thing. Notice how it doesn't say made by God or natural forces on it. You have to observe this, and you have to interpret the evidence within it to try and figure out how it got here. Science doesn't say anything, scientists do. How did this thing get here? A simple one-celled amoeba. Well, actually, a simple one-celled amoeba is not so simple. In fact, in Darwin's day, we didn't know what was in a cell. Now we know what's in a cell. And when you look inside a cell, you see a city worth of information and activity. It's like a giant factory. In fact, to show you what's inside a cell, let me take you to your breakfast table. How many people here like alphabet cereal? Anyone like alphabet cereal? Let's suppose you want to have a bowl of alphabet cereal. You're a teenager, and one day you come downstairs to have a bowl of alphabet cereal, and you see that the box is knocked over on the table, and right in the middle of the table, the letter spelled, "Take out the garbage, Mom." What are you going to assume? The cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? No, you're going to say that that's intelligent design from an intelligent being, Mom. Or let's say you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, "John loves Mary." What do you assume? The waves did that? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? No, you're going to say that that had to be the product of intelligence. Even something as simple as "John loves Mary," that's got to be the product of intelligence. Because you know that messages in all your prior experience always come from minds. Well, if "Take out the garbage, Mom" requires a mind, then what about this message? DNA, the four-letter genetic alphabet that every living thing has. You have DNA, I have DNA, a banana has DNA. You know the longest word we've ever discovered? It's inside of you. In every one of your 40 trillion cells, there's a message that's 3.5 billion letters long. All the letters are in the right order. How did they get there? Do you know that in DNA, A always goes with T, C always goes with G. These are abbreviations for more sophisticated names. But there is no known physical, biological, or chemical reason why the joined letters go in the order they're in up and down the spine of the DNA. This is known, by the way, as a program. In fact, Bill Gates, who, as you know, is no Christian, said human DNA is like a computer program, but it's far more sophisticated than anything we've ever developed. I don't know about you, but whenever I see a program, I know there must be a programmer. Wherever I see a code, there must be a coder. Wherever I see a message, there must be a messenger. So what we're saying here is that DNA is like a message. Take out the garbage, Mom. Now, the question is, some might say, well, wait a minute, Frank. Yeah, it's 3.5 billion letters long in my cells, but how about in an amoeba? How much is it there? Maybe it's simple and it evolved to this point. Well, let me ask you a question before we even look at how much data is in an amoeba. Can you evolve a code randomly? Let's just say you granted me Microsoft PowerPoint right here, which I'm showing you this presentation on, and we began to mutate the code randomly. What would happen to the program? It's going to crash very quickly, of course. You're never going to get a code by mutating it randomly. It's going to go to gibberish. But let's humor the question anyway. How much information is in an amoeba? You know how much information is in an amoeba? About 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia is in an amoeba. Now, to believe that that resulted by natural forces is like believing that the Library of Congress, just down the street here, resulted from an explosion in a printing shop. I don't have enough faith to believe that. All the letters are here in the right order because there's a mind behind it. The first life seems to require an intelligent cause, and I would argue subsequent life as well. Now, you might say, Frank, well, how do you even know this? Did some Christian tell you there's this much information in an amoeba? No, you know who told me this? Probably the most famous biologist who's an atheist in the world, and that's Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, the guy who wrote The God Delusion. He's the guy that says there's this much information out there in an amoeba. Now, This is not a God of the gaps argument. Have you heard of God of the gaps argument? You know what that means? Have you ever heard that phrase? Well, you just haven't found a natural cause yet, so you have a gap in your knowledge, and you're going to plug God into that gap and say, God did it, but later on we're going to find a natural cause, and then you're going to look real stupid. I used to think that the gods cause thunder directly. They're up there bowling or something, and now we know, no, there's a natural cause, okay? Is this a God of the gaps argument? To say that there must be an intelligence because you see an amoeba, that much information in it? No, why not? Because it's not just that we lack a natural explanation for take out the garbage mom. It's that take out the garbage mom is positive, verifiable information or evidence for an intelligent being. When you see take out the garbage mom on the table, you don't just lack a natural explanation. You go, that's positive information for mom, or positive evidence for mom. Same thing is true when you see it in an amoeba. You don't just lack a natural explanation. You say that's positive, verifiable evidence for an intelligence. In fact, let's just not talk about amoebas. Let's talk about you. This is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. In fact, let's go back even further. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some old people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well in case you've forgotten how this works. But when your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg. And then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limping here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt. Yet it contained half of the genetic information that makes you you. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the genetic information that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separated 2-year-olds from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, Frank, you can't legislate morality. Newsflash, all laws legislate morality. All laws declare one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. The question isn't whether or not you can legislate morality. The question is, whose morality will you legislate? And when people come up to me and they say, don't legislate your morality on me, don't impose your morality on me, first thing I say is, why not? Would that be immoral? And secondly, why are you imposing your morality on me? Because that's what you're doing right now. And secondly, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that theft is wrong, that rape is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and only by putting those two together can you perpetuate and stabilize society. I didn't make this stuff up. This isn't my morality. If you've got a problem with this morality, you don't have a problem with me. You've got a problem with the creator of this reality, the orderer of this reality. So it's not my morality. It's not your morality. We ought to legislate the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. So this isn't mine. It's ours. I'm just choosing to recognize it. You know what amazes me today as we go through these crazy debates over bathrooms now and marriage and all these things? I've noticed that generally speaking, conservatives want to change their behavior to fit reality, whereas liberals want to change reality to fit their behavior. You can't change reality to fit your behavior. You can try it over the short term, but long term, it's a disaster. We have to learn to live under what our founders called nature's law or natural law. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law. It's the way reality is structured. And when we try and bump up against that morality, we hurt ourselves and others. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. You know how to do this? I mean, are you thinking about this? Are you going, hold on, Frank, I got to concentrate. Got to make more red blood cells. No, you're not even thinking about this. Well, how is all this happening then? This is an argument for God we don't use anymore. We ought to. In fact, Aristotle brought it up initially. Thomas Aquinas baptized it in the 1200s AD. It's the argument known as final causality. What it means is the goal-directedness of nature. That nature is going in a direction, and if it's going in a direction, there must be a mind directing it. Let me give you an example of this. Not only are you going in a direction, your internal processes right now, but let's just take something simple like an acorn. Why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always become an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree, or a birch tree, or a seahorse? Because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Who programmed it? Is it conscious? Is it sitting in the ground going, all right, how do I become an oak tree? What do I have to do here? No. But if it's properly nourished, it will become an oak tree. If it doesn't have its own mind to become an oak tree, in other words, it's going in a direction to become an oak tree, then there must be an external mind directing it toward that end. That's what we mean by God. God just doesn't create the universe and then leaves it. God creates the universe and sustains it. Why are the natural laws so orderly and precise? Why can we build a spaceship here on Earth, launch it, and know that 9 years later it's going to pass within 7,000 miles of Pluto? Because we can rely on the laws of nature to do what they do consistently and repeatedly. Well, where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. Who's sustaining the laws of nature right now? There must be a mind because the laws of nature are going in a consistent, predictable, precise direction. That's what we mean by God. That's what Aristotle meant by the unmoved mover. That's what Aquinas meant by God. That's what Paul meant when he said, in him we live and move and have our being. In Christ all things are held together. The writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. He sustains them. He doesn't just create them and leave them. He creates them and sustains them. Again, God is to the universe what a band is to music. He creates and sustains, like a band creates and sustains. So if the universe has direction, if unconscious things have direction, which they do, there must be a conscious mind that is directing those things. That's what we mean by God. There's many more examples of this. In fact, in the book, Stealing from God, there's a whole chapter practically on this, if you want to go deeper into this idea of final causality, all right? So that's the teleological argument, and there's more in the book on that, but now we need to move to the moral argument. The moral argument that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligence, sustaining creator. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity with a couple of my sons and a friend of mine to go across Europe. We started in London and we wound up in Berlin. Kind of did the way the Allies went. We went through Normandy and we went and saw where Martin Luther tacked up his 95 Theses. Well, along the way, we stopped at the Buchenwald concentration camp outside of Weimar, Germany. And in April of 1945, the Allies liberated that camp. And they went through the front gate, which is still there. And they looked off to the right, and they saw the crematorium off in the distance, about 100 yards, and it's still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, this is just a matter of opinion. This is just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, you can't say that's really wrong. Well, we all know it's really wrong. In fact, let me ask you this question. How do you know, or how can you discover who's right and who's wrong? Is it Mother Teresa, the Catholic nun who served the poor most of her life in Calcutta, India, or was it the mass murderer, dictator of World War II, Hitler? How can you discover who's right and who's wrong? Well, let me ask you a question this way. How can you discover which map of Scotland is better? What would you need to see in order to know which map was better? You would need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland, right? If Scotland doesn't exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But since Scotland does exist, we can see that map A, while it's not perfect, it's a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. In other words, we have an external referent by which we can measure both of these maps to see which one measures up to the real thing, right? Well, that's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them. And we say Mother Teresa measured up to the standard better than did Hitler. And what is the standard? God's nature. God doesn't look to a standard beyond him. God doesn't invent a standard. He is the standard. You may have heard of the Euthyphro dilemma if you ever hear about this online. If you haven't heard about it, don't worry about it. It's in the book. But God doesn't create a standard beyond him. He doesn't invent a standard. He is the standard. God's nature is the standard of good. And that's how we can discover what good is. If there is no God, if there is no such thing as goodness, there's no such thing as evil. In fact, if there is no God, then the Nazis were not really wrong. I was at Michigan State a few years ago, and I knew there were a couple of atheists sitting on this side of the auditorium, and when we were done with the presentation and we were doing Q&A, a couple of them, we got talking about atheism and morality. I said to one of them, I said, well, you're an atheist. I said, what's your standard of morality? And the guy said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. And I said, are you telling me that if you lived in Nazi Germany and a majority or a plurality of people decided it was okay to kill undesirables, and to them it was Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, and Jehovah's Witnesses, that you could just do that? And that would be moral? And he paused, and he blushed, and he said, yes. And his atheist buddy sitting right next to him looked at him and literally yelled in his ear, no! But the first atheist knew in his heart the answer was no, but in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. Now, if you have a worldview that causes you to say that the Nazis were not really wrong, you have the wrong worldview. You know more certainly that the Nazis were wrong than you know that atheism's true. In other words, any argument you give for atheism will be built on weaker premises than the intuitive knowledge you have that murdering Jews or murdering homosexuals or anybody else is wrong. You already know that. So why would you ever say atheism's true, already knowing that certain things are right and certain things are wrong? If there is no God, love is no better than rape, not in an objective way. I mean, you may obviously love better, but It's not objectively better than rape. There are no human rights if there is no God. In the book Stealing from God, we talk about this quite a bit, that I see people in the political realm particularly arguing for certain rights. And many of these people argue for rights, and they're atheists. Like they say, oh, I got a right to same-sex marriage, I got a right to abortion, I got a right to taxpayer-funded health care, I got a right to all these things. Stop. If there's no God, there's no right to anything. It's just your opinion. Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, nothing's ultimately right or wrong. Which means you don't have rights. Governments may grant you what they consider rights, but when that government goes away, does that mean you don't have those rights anymore? No, rights are independent of government. Governments don't give rights. Governments secure rights, according to the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men to secure rights, not to give them or take them away. If the government gives you your rights, they're not really rights, they're just their opinions. And when the government goes away, you lose them? No. You have a right to life no matter who's in government. Here's the problem. If you're an atheist and you're arguing for certain rights, what you have to do is you have to steal from God while you're arguing against him. You're stealing the idea of rights when your worldview doesn't have any such thing as rights. There's no way to justify anything as being right or wrong if there's no God. It's all a matter of your opinion. That's why they have to steal from God to argue against him. So there are no human rights unless God exists. Now the problem is if you believe in certain rights, like same-sex marriage or abortion or some of these other things, you have a hard time making the case that God thinks that's a right. Also, tolerance is no better than intolerance. Now, ladies and gentlemen, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful how you answer. The answer is no. Why? Because tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And the way to love people is not to tolerate the evil they want to do. I mean, we know this as parents or children. How many in here are former children? Okay, you know that if your parents tolerated everything you wanted to do, would they be loving? No. Parents have to draw firm lines to protect their kids from evil. Tolerance in the face of evil is an evil itself. You don't tolerate evil. You may tolerate somebody's right to an opinion, but you don't tolerate the evil they want to do. In fact, complete tolerance would be anarchy and chaos. It would mean we'd have to tolerate everyone's behavior. No, the reason we have laws is because we don't tolerate certain behaviors. That's the whole point. So don't buy into this idea you have to tolerate everything. You start tolerating everything, you become a despot. You become evil itself. You're allowing things to occur that you shouldn't allow to occur. If there is no God, religious crusades are not wrong. I always hear the atheists complaining about the evil Christians have done in the Crusades. In fact, I debated Christopher Hitchens a couple of times, who was a brilliant British atheist. And he sounded even more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And he's since passed on, tragically, not because he debated me, but he died of cancer a few years ago. In fact, today we aired a program we recorded a few days ago with a friend of mine who wrote a book about Christopher Hitchens called The Faith of Christopher Hitchens. Interesting book, if you want to get it. It's by Larry Taunton. In any event, the debates I had with Christopher, which you can see on our website, he would complain about the evil Christians had done and religious people have done, to which I would agree with him. I'd say, Christopher, we have done evil. No, you're absolutely right. But what do you mean by evil? If there's no God, nothing's ultimately right or wrong or good or bad or right or evil or there's none of that. It's all a matter of opinion. You have to steal from God while claiming he doesn't exist. You have to steal a standard of good to say something's evil. You have to sit in God's lap to slap his face. There's nothing wrong with religious crusades if there is no God. And by the way, just a short course on the crusades, because the crusades are often misunderstood. When was the first crusade ordered, and what was the purpose of it? Does anyone know? Yes, go ahead, Kevin. You got it right, about 1095, yeah.
And it was done by Pope Urban II, and it was for two reasons. One, because economically speaking, the nobles kept fighting
Right, and the other aspect to that, as you say, Byzantine Empire, was for about 400 years, the Muslims had been taking Christian lands, particularly the Holy Land and other places. And the Pope decided, since the state and the church were integrated at that point, we need a military response to this. So we need to fight back, in other words. We just can't keep allowing the Muslims to overrun us. So they did. Now, they committed some atrocities along the way, but the point is the Crusades were a 400-year delayed military response to Muslim aggression. I mean, people think that the Crusades were all about trying to convert people to Christianity. That wasn't the primary purpose. The purpose was to take back lands that the Muslims had taken. It was a military response. And the atrocities that were done on the Crusades were not following Christ. They were opposing Christ. They were not obeying Christ. They were opposing him. But the Holocaust was the logical outworking of atheism. The Crusades were the illogical outworking of Christianity. The Holocaust was a logical outworking of atheism. In fact, what was the most bloody century in history? The 20th century. Do you know there were 100 million people killed, at least, in the 20th century, all by atheists, none of them named Hitler? Who were they? Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Lenin. Those four guys killed close to, if not more than, 100 million people in the name of atheism. They're all atheists. You throw Hitler in there, who certainly wasn't a Christian. People try and make a case that Hitler was a Christian. Oh, really? Hitler's worshiping a Jew? Really? Please. And you've got over 100 million people killed in the name of atheists. You always hear Christians or atheists talking about how many wars have been caused by religion. You know what the Encyclopedia of War says? Looking at all the warfare in history. How many wars have been caused by religion? Anyone know what percentage? What do you think it is? 7%. You take Islam out of it, it's 3%. Think about the last century. World War I, caused by religion. World War II, caused by religion. Korea, caused by religion. Vietnam, caused by religion. Gulf War, caused by religion. Although, what about Saddam Hussein? Saddam Hussein was an atheist. He wasn't a Muslim. He claimed to be, but I was in the Navy, which, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. Before we went to the Persian Gulf, we went in a briefing room, and I can tell you this now because it's ancient history. We went in a briefing room. They put Saddam Hussein on the thing, and the intel guy told us everything about him. He's an atheist. He's not following anybody. He just wants control. He wants power. So just think about the major wars of the past century. None of them have anything to do with religion. Or if they do, it's just tangential to the issue. People are killed quite frequently in the name of atheism. In fact, Hitler was using Darwinism to advocate for creating the super race. Let's get rid of all these non-desirables. Let's get rid of all these people who are taking resources from the super race. This is survival of the fittest, after all. Let's get rid of all these people and we can create the super race. That's just Darwinism. All right. Number 6, you can't complain about the problem of evil if there is no God. Why can't you complain about the problem of evil if there is no God? Because there's no such thing as evil unless there is no God. Or unless there is a God, I should say. If there is a God, there is evil. Not because God is doing evil, but because God is the standard of good which makes evil possible. In fact, C.S. Lewis thought there was too much evil in the world, so there couldn't be a good God. Then one day he realized his reasoning was wrong. He ultimately wrote his epiphany in Mere Christianity. Here's what he wrote. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, something can't be unjust unless something is just. Something can't be not right unless something is right. Something can't be immoral unless something is moral. You see, The problem here is that when atheists say there's too much evil in the world, they're actually stealing good from God in order to say there's evil. Because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed, because God's nature is the standard of good. In fact, many years ago, Augustine had a problem. St. Augustine, who lived about 400 AD, he had a problem because he puzzled over this problem. God created all things. Evil is a thing. Therefore, God created evil. And he went, man, there's got to be a problem here because God can't be the creator of evil. And then he realized the second premise was false. Evil is not a thing. Evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of the car, you got a better car. If you take all the car out of the rust, you just got a rust spot on the pavement, right? You got nothing. Evil is like rot in a tree. If you take all the rot out of the tree, you got a better tree. If you take all the tree out of the rot, you've got nothing. In other words, evil doesn't exist on its own. Evil exists as a kind of a parasite in a good thing. In fact, Lewis, in another context, put it this way: the shadows prove the sunshine. In order for there to be shadows, there has to be sunshine. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. You can't have shadows without sunshine. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Is this making sense? So don't let people get away with the idea, well, there's too much evil in the world, there can't be a good God. No. The very fact that you know evil exists shows that God exists. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but if evil exists, God exists. Again, not because God is doing evil, because he's the standard of good that makes evil even possible. Let me be very careful as to what we are saying and what we are not saying. We are not saying atheists can't be moral. They can. We are not saying atheists don't know morality. They do. In fact, in my debates with Christopher Hitchens, he sometimes would say, well, you're not calling me a bad guy, are you? Or I can know morality. No. Of course you can. Of course you can know morality. Of course you can do good things. In fact, do you need the Bible to know right from wrong? Be careful how you answer. The answer is no, you don't need the Bible. No, the Bible will give you more details. But everybody knows basic right and wrong. It's written on your heart. In fact, the Bible even teaches that. Romans chapter 2, the Gentiles do not have the law written on their hearts. If you had to have the Bible to know right from wrong, then God was unjust for judging the entire generation of Noah. They didn't have a Bible. He'd also be unjust for judging the Canaanites. They didn't have a Bible. He said, you still should have known that these abominable practices were wrong, regardless of whether you had the Bible or not. So atheists can be moral, and they can know morality. We're not saying it's an issue of knowing. It's an issue of justifying. Atheists can't justify morality. They can theorize about how we know murder's wrong, but atheism provides no immaterial objective standard that establishes why murder is wrong. See, this is the biggest problem made in these debates. If you're ever talking with somebody about this issue, they're going to say, well, no, I learned morality through evolution, or I learned morality from my parents, or I learned morality through science, or I learned morality through society, or all these things. All that is irrelevant. That's not the point. The point isn't how you know something. The point is, why does that something exist? And in an atheistic world where there's nothing but materials, where do you get a moral law from? Morality isn't made of molecules. I mean, what does justice weigh? What's the love molecule? Gee, if we could find it, we could just inject everybody with it, right? No, these are immaterial things. They're not made of molecules, yet atheists believe all that exists are materials. You see, an immaterial standard of justice requires a theistic God. In fact, here's an illustration you can use if people confuse this. And just to be technically precise here, what we're talking about here is the difference between what philosophers call epistemology, that's how you know something, and ontology, which is the study of being, why something exists. How you know something, there's a lot of different ways you know it. Could be God written on your heart. Could be that society taught you, your mom taught you, whoever. But why that something exists, that's the question we're dealing with. We don't care about how you know it at this point. We want to know, why does this thing known as justice exist? And let me give you an illustration. I can read a book and know what the book says and deny there's an author, right? But there would be no book to know unless there was an author. You with me on this? Similarly, I can know morality. I can know right from wrong and deny God exists, but there would be no right and wrong to know unless God exists. Just like I can read a book and deny there's an author, I can know right from wrong and deny God, but I can't justify what's right and what's wrong without God. There is no standard if it's just my opinion. So here's Christopher Hitchens in our second debate. And by the way, he wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Well, what's this word poison mean? Well, it's a nice way of saying religion's evil. It's a fun way of saying religion's evil. But again, if there's no good, there can't be anything evil. So he's actually, again, stealing from God to argue against him. And by the way, religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I mean, I poison religion because I can't live up to the pure words of Christ. In fact, in the second debate, I said to him, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to this book. But if I could, I wouldn't need a Savior. I mean, if Christians were perfect, we wouldn't need a Savior. So when you say religious people have done evil things, you're kind of proving our worldview. Of course we've done evil things. That's why we need a Savior. And I said to him, when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, we say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. We're all hypocrites down at the church. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need a Savior. I realize theologically we're saints because we're covered in the blood of Christ, but still, behavioral-wise, we're still hypocrites. We don't live up to everything Jesus says, do we? And if we did, we wouldn't need a Savior. So he's kind of proven our worldview. By the way, a couple other things about Hitchens. If you read his book and you knew his life, he was just angry. Very angry at God, which is why I ended both of the debates this way. I said, you can sum up Christopher Hitchens' book in one sentence. Here it is. There is no God, and I hate him. I mean, he was just mad. And it revolved around, to a certain extent, sexual morality. He didn't want God to be like a cosmic North Korean dictator. That's his metaphor for God, that God's looking in on everything you're doing and he's judging you on everything. It was totally a moral objection, not an intellectual objection that he had. He didn't want there to be a God. And by the way, his book should not be called God is Not Great. You know what it literally should be called? Man is Not Great. Because he's really talking about all the bad things human beings have done, to which we agree. We have done evil. That's why we need a Savior. And by the way, what do you mean by evil? So, of course, man is not great. Jesus came to save us from ourselves, didn't he? So let's sum up where we've been, and then we'll go to lunch. What do you think? We'll take a couple questions and go to lunch. All right. From these three arguments, we can learn something about this being. First of all, from the cosmological argument here, we can learn that the being that created the universe is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space. So he can't be made of material, time, and space, right? You see, he can't be made of material, time, and space if material, time, and space were created. Secondly, we know that this being is extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. You notice everything else we create out of pre-existing material. God creates out of nothing. What's nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. From the design argument, we can see that this being is extremely intelligent. We can also see that this being sustains creation and has purpose. We're here for a reason. From the moral argument, we can see this being is absolutely morally perfect and he's also personal. Now, why? Well, how do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you put this hoop down and you try and dunk that basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. Also, we know that this being is personal from the cosmological argument. You say, how so? Like, why couldn't an impersonal force have created the universe? Because impersonal forces don't make choices. Like gravity. What does gravity do? It just does the same thing over and over again. Gravity doesn't decide, look, if Turek drops that thing one more time, I'm not going to pull it down, right? It just does the same thing over and over again. In order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. Impersonal forces don't make choices. Now, we have, from these three arguments, check this out, we have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, sustaining creator who has purpose, who's absolutely morally perfect and personal. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet we have a being that suspiciously looks like the God of the Bible, right? We're not quoting Bible verses here. We're just saying, look, when you look at the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, and you look at the attributes that flow from those arguments, you realize you have a being that looks like God. Now, does this mean that Christianity is true? No, not necessarily. Why? Because it could be another theism that's true. It could be Judaism or Islam, right? Actually, it can't be Islam. Why can't it be Islam? Because according to Islamic doctrine, Allah is arbitrary. In other words, Allah isn't the standard of good. Allah, whatever he does is good. So if he one day decides murder's okay, murder's okay. Allah is not the standard of good. Allah only loves those who believe. He doesn't love unbelievers. But I put it up there anyway because it is a big theistic religion. So, if God wanted to show us which one of these world religions was true, or maybe there's another theism we don't know about yet, what could he do that would authenticate that one of these was true? Yeah, he would do a miracle, and that's the third point, okay? He could do a miracle to say, follow this guy, he speaks for me. And that's what we're going to look at after lunch, but before we go to lunch, we got 10 minutes for questions. So, questions. Anyone have a question? Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name's Tracy.
Hey, Tracy.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The definition of good and evil not being possible without God, very good answers to that. But how do you answer someone who says they define good or evil based on if it hurts someone else? I've heard people argue that, especially with sexual immorality, where consenting adults, it isn't hurting anyone else, so it isn't evil, whereas the Holocaust hurt someone else.
A couple of things. Let's just ask the question. First of all, what do you mean by hurt? What does that mean? I'm not asking you. You asked that person that. What do you mean by, does it just mean physical? Psychological, emotional, spiritual, moral? What do you mean by hurt? Secondly, what's that, Fran?
I think it's a combination of everything.
Yeah, I think it is too. Secondly, how do you know whether or not it's going to hurt somebody? Quite frequently you don't, right? Thirdly, why is it wrong to hurt? Who said? You said? What if Hitler says it's not wrong to hurt? Who's right? You need somebody to adjudicate, and that's what we mean by God, right? Fourthly, I might give him an example. Suppose you and I are married, you might say to this person, and I cheat on you, but I never tell you and you never find out. Is that wrong? Or not? Oh, it's not wrong if nobody ever finds out? I mean, I don't hurt you because you don't know about it.
Right.
I mean, you can go on and on with these kind of scenarios, right? But this person is smuggling in a moral law into his or her system. This hurt criteria, whatever that means. Now, you might agree with me. You might say, generally that's true. Generally, you can discover what is right and wrong by whether or not it hurts somebody. That's generally true, not in all cases, but generally that's true. But that's how you discover what is right and wrong. That doesn't explain what rightness is. Again, that's an epistemological, not an ontological question. We're dealing with ontology, which is how do you explain why goodness itself exists outside of God? If there is no God, goodness doesn't exist. It's just someone's opinion.
And it wouldn't matter if anyone was hurt.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tracy. Kevin?
Hello again.
Alrighty, so it's a two-parter question dealing with two issues. First, with the idea of intelligent design versus evolution and all that. And then the second one is going with the moral obligation. Okay, so let's go to the first part. Now, about 3 years ago, and you can look this up, but you probably already know, scientists were able to artificially create single-celled organisms using basic elements, the right temperatures, right chances, all that good stuff. It has been done.
Yeah, that's Craig Ventnor in La Jolla, California.
Yes, you know that. That's awesome. But, okay, so now we look at this ever-expanding universe, okay, and percentage chances, as you were talking about, this idea that we are a third rock from the sun, that we're in this Goldilocks era, and scientists going out have actually found 11 other planets that could hold life. Now, I'm not saying that there's extraterrestrials out there, that there's little green men, but there could be bacteria, there could be other life out there, statistically speaking, okay? So what is that saying? Yes, I know for all those molecules to get in the right temperature, in the right condition, at the right time to create life is extremely small, but in an ever-expanding universe, that percentage of life goes up drastically.
No, it doesn't really, and here's why. Because it's not how many chances you have that makes it possible. It's the fact that you need an organizer to bring it all together. Because you could take, say a living cell and puncture it and kill it. Right?
Okay.
Now you've got all the elements for life right there, right in one place. How are you going to get that thing to become alive again? I mean, do you believe in resurrection without an intelligence?
Well, what I'm saying with that is that those conditions can be recreated, and if they're on an ever-expanding universe in conditions that all the different galaxies, all the different planets, all the different solar systems, statistically speaking, there can be other random chances, well, not random, but statistically very low, that can raise up.
Let me just show a short video on this, because I think this will point out that even if the whole universe was some kind of prebiotic soup, it wouldn't give us the amount of well, let me just show it to you.
Experiments and you analyze how much information is required to get, say, a new protein fold, it's just far beyond what you can get by random mutation and natural selection.
How far beyond? Axe published his findings in the Journal of Molecular Biology. He determined that among all the possible amino acid combinations, the probability of generating just one short protein by mutation is roughly 1 in 10 to the 74th power, or 1 chance in 100 trillion, 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 trillion.
To put that in context, there's only 10 to the 65 atoms in the entire galaxy. So to build a new functional protein by selection and mutation within the time allowed for the Cambrian explosion, what you're essentially having to do is equivalent to a blindfolded man looking throughout the entire galaxy for one marked atom. So what we're talking about is searching for a tiny, tiny needle in an enormous haystack and having a very limited time to search.
So on the question of something like the Cambrian explosion, there does not appear to be any way that unguided random mutations can accomplish what needs to be accomplished to explain new functional proteins. And certainly by extension, wherever in the history of life you would need to have multiple new protein folds, the probabilities multiply. So there's no reason to think that this is plausible.
Now, this is a video called Darwin's Dilemma, which you can buy. It's, say, 6 or 7 years old, put out by the Discovery Institute. And they're talking about the Cambrian explosion, which is the known fact that even atheists agree that most of the major body plans came into fossil forms about 550 million years ago, according to their dating, fully formed as if they're just there, like they were created. And this video is saying in the entire galaxy, there's not enough atoms to bring forth this kind of, even if the whole galaxy, you used all the atoms and all the time we have left, you're not even going to get a protein, much less life. Protein isn't life, as you know. It's a building block of life. So you can have all the numbers you want and all the atoms you want. You have to go from the atoms themselves to life, and nobody knows how to do that. You know how Ventnor did it. Ventnor used I think he used some models of DNA, or he took something from actual life and adapted it. I don't know all the details, but Ventnor's using what? Intelligence to do it, right? If somebody ever creates life in the laboratory, it's going to prove intelligent design because it took a lot of intelligence to do it. It didn't happen he didn't go into his laboratory one day and see life appear out of nothing. He put his intelligence to it, right?
Now, this goes into my second part.
All right.
Improving intelligent design. And let's take an example like gay rights, homosexual marriage, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, rational argument would state that people or just beings follow the easiest path possible or the most pleasurable path possible. You know, as we were talking about before, this idea of happiness, that people, you know, they would rather do this than that because this serves them in a particular purpose. Mm-hmm. Now, in that statement, what you just did there is state, because why would people choose to be gay? Why would people choose to be a particular way that society will discredit them, will harass them, will do all these terrible things? Why would people choose that way?
Okay, well,
so that breaks to the point that they were that way preconceived.
Okay, hold on. First of all, even if it's true that people are born with certain tendencies, that doesn't mean that the behavior that flows from those tendencies, or I should say the actions that flow from the attractions, is a good thing, right? I mean, we all have things we're born with, we think we're born with, that we ought not act on. For example, if I'm born with the anti-gay gene, does that make gay bashing okay for me?
Oh, of course not.
Okay. If someone's born with an orientation toward violence, or anger, does that make violence okay for that person? If somebody's born with an orientation toward pedophilia, or alcoholism, or drug use, does that make those things okay for those people? No. So just because you may think you're born a certain way doesn't mean that the actions that you want to engage in are good actions. In fact, the truth is we're all born that way. That's why we need a savior. We're all born with an orientation toward bad behavior. So I don't think the born that way argument, although it sounds good rhetorically, logically gets people anywhere, because we're all born with orientations that we ought not act on. Now, secondly, when you look at the studies, you look at twin studies, you look at all sorts of different studies to try and figure out whether people are born with a certain sexual orientation, particularly homosexual orientation, the studies at best are inconclusive. In fact, if it was shown to be genetic, the world would be trumpeting it, but they're not, because they know the evidence isn't there. I had a discussion once with a homosexual activist, and he said, I was born this way. I said, how did you know that? He said, well, from the age 9 on, I always liked men. You think anything might have happened prior to age 9? There's no way any one of us in here could know what we were born with. Why? Because when you're born, you don't know anything. Could something have happened in your environment? Yeah, it's possible. You don't know whether you're born that way. So people what they mean is from from puberty on, I always liked the same sex. Okay, maybe you have. But that doesn't mean that that's something that you ought to act on. Just like if I'm born with an anti-gay gene or a violence gene or whatever, that doesn't mean those things are good for me.
So they're hindered from birth and actually have less rights under that on these unalienable rights, right?
Who has less rights? What do you mean?
That means that preconceived, they are given at a disadvantage.
Everybody's given at a disadvantage in a different way. Although Jefferson said all men are created equal, what he meant was all men are made in the image of God, not that all men have equal abilities or all men have an equal shot at success, so to speak, because that's obviously not the case. Some people are more gifted in other areas and may be more successful in this life than others. But that doesn't mean they're not equally valuable because they're made in the image of God. They are. Regardless of what anyone's sexual orientation is, they're equally valuable in the sight of God because they're made in the image of God.
Okay, then. Well, thank you. I know there's other questions. That's why, but I was just trying to get
All right,
to
thanks,
that.
Kevin.
Thank you.
Let's go to Matthew, and then we'll have lunch. Go ahead, Matthew.
All right, mine's hopefully a quick question, more of a clarification to get kind of the conclusion of the morality argument from you, because basically my question is this. So the argument of the morality argument that if there is no God, then anything's acceptable. If you have morality, there must be a moral lawgiver. So my question is, almost practically, so what? Because just because morality requires a moral lawgiver doesn't necessitate a moral lawgiver. For all we know, everything is a social construct. Everything we know about morality is something that just has occurred and something that has become, what we're familiar with or whatever it might be. So the fact that a morality requires a moral lawgiver doesn't mean that there has to be a God. So my question is, what conclusion out of the morality argument actually proves the existence of God? Doesn't it just prove that morality requires God?
If you want to deny objective morality, then you can say there is no God, like some atheists will do that. David Silverman, a guy I debated on that. Mm-hmm. He actually, in our debate, which again you can see on our website, said the Nazis were not really wrong because he's trying to be consistent with his atheism. But my point is, I can't prove to you that murdering Jews is wrong because you already know it.
So what if, though, what we think we know intuitively isn't actually written on our hearts, to quote the Bible? What if, just for the sake of argument, what if that intuitiveness isn't really intuitive, it's just something that we're familiar with, therefore we're most comfortable with? So what if it's not intuitive? What if what we think is intuitive really is just all we've ever known? Doesn't that mean
again,
that...
I'm not necessarily concerned about how you know it, whether it's intuition or whether your parents taught you or evolution taught you, if you're going to believe in whatever it is. I'm more concerned the question we're asking is, why is it wrong to murder people? Why is it wrong to torture babies for fun?
But you assume it's wrong. Where does that assumption come from?
Well, it does come partially from intuition, but I would need evidence far greater than that to say I ought not believe torturing babies for fun is wrong. What evidence could you give me that would talk me out of my moral intuition that murdering babies or torturing babies for fun is wrong?
Well, how can I trust your moral intuition? Maybe that's just a relative issue. If we're assuming there's no God, then it'd be all relative. And why would I assume that your moral intuition is accurate or that it's to be trusted?
You seem to be always wanting to take the less evidentiary position, Matthew. I don't know why you would do that. Wouldn't it make more sense to follow the evidence where it leads? Why would you question your most essential beliefs that murdering or torturing babies for fun is wrong? In fact, let me give you one illustration of this that just happened in South Dakota. I was in South Dakota in February. Why I was in South Dakota in February is another question. But I was at a church for several nights, and the second night, there were a couple of young men who were asking me questions, and they seemed pretty skeptical. The third night, the last night, there was a guy who came up to the microphone. He was about 50 or so years old, and he started to ask his question, but he couldn't quite ask it. He started to cry. So I went down to him because he had his question on two pieces of paper, and he just handed it to me. He said, read it. And so I'm walking back up to the platform, and I'm trying to read 2 pages of one question. And I'm trying to summarize it in my mind so I can present it to everybody. And he just says, read it. So I say, I realize as I'm reading it that this man is the father of the 2 that were there the night before. And he's upset that they've become atheists. And the reason they've become atheists is because they recently discovered that his daughter, their sister, had been sexually abused by a friend of the family from age 4 to age 14, right under their noses. And they decided that there can't be a good God who would have allowed this to happen. One of them was in seminary, dropped out of seminary, and came home, and now they're mad at God. What can he do about it? And so I said to him, Steve, hopefully this is just a season. It's okay to be mad at God. People in the Bible are mad at God. Read Habakkuk. Read some of the prophets. Read the psalmists. They're mad at God. It's okay to be mad at God. But let me ask you this, Steve. Or I said this to him. I said, Steve, you'll know when the time is right, but I want you to say this to your sons when the time is right. You can be mad at God, but know this. If you're going to say God doesn't exist, then what you're also saying is what this monster did to your sister wasn't really wrong. You want to believe that? The very reason you're mad is because you know how wrong that was. And if that's really wrong, then God exists. Here's another thing. This guy who did this is still loose. They know who it was, but they can't convict him. Why? Because every time the trial comes up, she psychologically checks out. She can't testify against him in a courtroom at this point. So he's free, and yet everybody knows he did it. If there is no God, he will never get justice either. If he never gets justice here, he's never going to get it in eternity either. You want to believe that? You think that's true and right? No. So your basic moral intuitions strongly tell you that what this guy did was wrong. Why would you ever accept any argument that's based on far weaker premises to say what he did wasn't really wrong, and therefore God doesn't exist? One other thing about this. This young woman, her name is Jessica Mitzel. She wrote a book, which you can get on Amazon. You can look it up right now. It's called Not Your Princess. And now she's getting emails and phone calls from other young women who are going through this same problem. And she, as strong as she is having trouble dealing with the questions, what do I do? Can you help me? She's only 18 herself, and she's still recovering from this horror. So she tried to turn something negative into a positive by writing this book, but still, it's difficult. So I don't see any reason to ever doubt the fact that what this man did to this young woman is wrong. And if it really is wrong, then God exists.
So basically, to clarify, the argument is that if we want morality to exist, then God must
Not
exist.
if we want morality to exist. We already know it exists beyond a reasonable doubt, and therefore God exists. It's just not just wishful thinking that I think sexually abusing a 4-year-old girl is wrong. I already know it's wrong. I don't need any evidence. I already know it. I can't prove to you it's wrong. You already know it. It just is.
So if someone were to deny that gut instinct, which
If someone were
I find it hard to believe that you can deny that gut instinct.
Exactly.
But I think you could make an argument to deny that intuition.
You would. What possible evidence could you bring to bear to somebody to say that sexually abusing a 4-year-old girl, a 50-year-old man abusing a 4-year-old girl isn't really wrong?
All you'd have to say is, well, God doesn't exist, so it doesn't matter. I mean, it's circular. Either way, either argument that I make or you make, one requires the other, and it goes around in a circle.
Well, this isn't the only evidence we have for God, obviously.
Sure,
We've got the cosmological and the teleological argument as well, so this fits nicely with those other arguments. It's not like we're basing everything on the moral argument. But I can't see any reason to doubt any argument to say that torturing babies for fun is not wrong, or any argument that says a 50-year-old man sexually abusing a 4-year-old girl is not wrong, would be based on weaker premises than just the idea that sexually abusing a 4-year-old girl is wrong. So why would I take the weaker case? That's what I'm trying to figure out from you. Why would you ever do that? I mean, you can ask the question, but
Right.
why would you ever doubt it? I don't understand why you doubt your most basic presuppositions, your most basic intuitions, I should say. There's no reason to doubt them.
There's no reason to doubt.
That sexually abusing children is wrong. You already know it is. Why would you doubt that? If it is
so
wrong.
the argument comes down to that issue, that you already know it, so why question it?
What evidence could you bring to bear to say that that's false?
But if there was evidence,
What is it?
It would shake things up. I'm saying if there was evidence, though.
Well, I mean, you could always say if there was, but I mean, why?
But is it possible? I mean, I still think it's possible to make the argument. My question is, does the morality argument actually prove God exists, or does it raise a really challenging question that you must grapple with?
What's the challenging question you need to grapple with?
Well, what you just said. I mean, the question, is it okay to sexually abuse someone? Is it okay to rape someone? Is it okay to murder? Those
aren't questions in my mind. Why are they questions? Why is it a question to say you ought not murder someone? Why is it a question to say you ought not sexually abuse children?
But isn't the only reason it's not a question for you is because you already believe in morality? If I don't believe in morality to start with, then it is a question.
Why would you not believe it? Tell me the evidence you have that you ought not believe sexually abusing a 4-year-old girl isn't wrong. Give me the evidence now.
Well, the evidence would be if God doesn't exist, then it clearly...
That's what we're trying to prove. Forget that.
I know, but I'm looking at the opposite. Because if we flip the tables, if God doesn't exist, then anything is acceptable. The only reason that I believe that it's not okay, because I firmly believe that any of those things that you've listed are absolutely reprehensible and horrible. Only reason I believe that, though, is because I believe there's a moral lawgiver. I believe in God.
That's not why you believe it. Because you have an effect and you're reasoning back to a cause. If the effect is that you have a moral sense that torturing babies for fun is wrong or sexually abusing children is wrong, you then reason back to the cause God. If you have a creation, you know there must be a creator. If you have a moral law, you know there must be a moral lawgiver. You're taking the effect and you're reasoning back to the cause.
So I'm taking, I need God to justify my argument, therefore I believe in God?
No. You have the effect, you have the data, which is the idea that torturing babies for fun is wrong or sexually abusing children is wrong. You already know that. So what accounts for that? What's the cause of that? There's a standard of goodness out there, which happens to coincide with God's nature. Now, we can talk more about this later if you want.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Okay, good.